A twig snaps somewhere beyond the firelight. Not loud, not close, just enough. A child freezes. An older woman lifts her head. A hunter slowly stops chewing. Nobody speaks. Beyond the circle of orange light, the darkness remains perfectly still. And somehow, that makes it worse. For a few seconds, nothing happens. Then everyone continues as if nothing occurred. But something has already happened. Every heart around that fire has accelerated. Every muscle has tightened. Every mind has shifted from comfort to vigilance. Not because they know what is out there, because they don't. And hidden inside that tiny moment is one of the oldest questions humanity can ask. What was the first thing we were ever afraid of? Most people imagine the answer is obvious. Predators, wolves, lions, snakes, the creatures that hunted our ancestors for millions of years. That seems reasonable. After all, fear is supposed to protect us from danger. Danger usually has teeth. But the deeper scientists looked into the origins of fear, the stranger the story became. Because the first human fear may not have been a creature at all. It may not have had claws, or eyes, or a shape. The first fear may have been something far more powerful. Something that still follows every human being alive today. The unknown. And to understand why, we have to travel back long before civilization, long before language, long before humanity itself. Back to a world where survival was measured in minutes, where every day was an experiment and every mistake was fatal. Imagine standing in East Africa 3 million years ago. No cities, no roads, no houses, no medicine, only grasslands stretching toward the horizon, scattered trees, heat shimmering in the distance, and somewhere beyond sight, something is watching. The landscape looks peaceful. It wasn't. This was one of the most dangerous environments any intelligent creature would ever inhabit. Ancient humans were not powerful. They were not fast. They were not strong. Compared to the predators around them, they were astonishingly vulnerable. A leopard could outrun them. A lion could overpower them. Even large birds of prey posed a threat to their young. Yet somehow, these fragile creatures survived. Not because they became stronger than nature, but because they learned something more important: how to anticipate danger before danger appeared. That sounds simple. It isn't. Most animals react. Humans predict. And that difference may have changed everything. Researchers studying the evolution of cognition noticed something unusual. The human brain seems almost obsessed with imagining threats. Not actual threats. Possible threats. A rustling bush. A strange sound. An unfamiliar shadow. Most of the time, those signals mean nothing. Yet our brains treat them as important, sometimes urgently important. At first glance, this seems inefficient. Why waste energy worrying about dangers that may not exist? But evolution operates on a brutal accounting system. Imagine two ancient humans. One hears movement in the grass and assumes it is the wind. The other assumes it might be a predator. The first human relaxes. The second climbs a tree. If the sound truly is the wind, the cautious individual loses a few minutes. If the sound is a lion, the careless one loses everything. Over thousands of generations, natural selection favored a peculiar mistake. It rewarded creatures that were occasionally paranoid. The result was a brain designed not merely to detect danger, but to imagine it. And suddenly fear became something entirely new. It no longer depended on reality. It could exist before reality arrived. This is where the story becomes strange. Because the earliest fear may not have been fear of predators. It may have been fear of uncertainty itself. Scientists sometimes refer to this as uncertainty monitoring, the ability to recognize that you do not know something. Many animals display traces of it. Humans transformed it into an operating system. We became aware of what we didn't know. And once that happened, ignorance itself became threatening. A predator is frightening, but an invisible predator is worse. A storm is dangerous, but a storm hidden beyond the horizon is somehow more disturbing. The mind begins generating possibilities. Possibilities multiply, and fear emerges not from certainty, but from imagination. This may be one of the most consequential developments in evolutionary history, because the same mental machinery that created anxiety also created foresight. The ability to worry about tomorrow eventually became the ability to plan for tomorrow. Fear and intelligence were never enemies. They evolved together, like twin branches growing from the same root. Most people think fear exists to make us run. That is only part of the story. Fear also makes us think. In fact, some neuroscientists argue that fear helped build the modern human mind. The evidence is surprising. When researchers study how the brain responds to uncertainty, they find activity in regions responsible for prediction, memory, decision-making, and future planning. Fear is not merely an alarm system. It is a forecasting system. Every anxious thought begins with a question. What if? What if something is behind the hill? What if winter comes early? What if the herd disappears? What if the river floods? What if the stranger cannot be trusted? Civilization itself may have emerged from these questions. The first shelter was built because someone feared exposure. The first stored food existed because someone feared starvation. The first weapon existed because someone feared attack. Again and again, fear was transformed into preparation. Preparation became innovation. Innovation became civilization. The emotion we often describe as weakness may have helped create everything around us. Yet there is a darker side to this story. Because once fear learned to imagine the future, it became impossible to fully escape. A lion eventually leaves. A storm eventually passes. But uncertainty has no natural endpoint. The unknown can expand forever. And nowhere is this more visible than in the human relationship with darkness. Darkness terrifies people across cultures, across continents, across history. Why? Most assume the answer is predators. Again, that explanation is incomplete. Darkness itself is not dangerous. It is merely the absence of information. When the lights disappear, certainty disappears with them. The brain suddenly loses its map of reality. The room becomes unfamiliar. The ordinary becomes ambiguous. And ambiguity is where ancient fear awakens. Researchers noticed that humans often overestimate threats in low-visibility environments. A coat hanging on a chair becomes a figure. A creaking floor becomes footsteps. A shadow becomes a presence. The brain begins filling gaps, not with facts, but with possibilities. And possibilities have always been the natural habitat of fear. Thousands of years passed. Humanity built villages, then kingdoms, then empires. Technology advanced. Fear remained. The objects changed. The mechanism did not. We stopped fearing lions outside the cave. We started fearing rejection, failure, isolation, meaninglessness, and death. Each era invented new threats. Yet beneath them all, the same ancient pattern persisted, the unknown. A job interview is frightening because the outcome is uncertain. A medical test is frightening because the result is unknown. A first conversation with a stranger. A financial risk. A major life decision. Again and again, fear emerges at the border between what we know and what we cannot know. The landscape changed. The operating system did not. And then there is death, the ultimate unknown. For thousands of years, philosophers, scientists, priests, and storytellers have attempted to understand why humans fear death so intensely. Many explanations exist: pain, loss, extinction. But researchers repeatedly encounter a deeper possibility. Perhaps death frightens us because it represents the largest uncertainty imaginable. No living mind can fully examine it from the outside. No complete map exists. No definitive answer survives scrutiny. The boundary remains. And the human brain has always struggled when confronted with boundaries it cannot cross. This is not merely a biological problem. It is a philosophical one. The same species that learned to predict the future eventually discovered a future it could never fully predict. And so humanity found itself facing the greatest mystery it had ever encountered. Not a predator, not an enemy, not a storm, a question. But here is the paradox. The unknown is not only the source of fear, it is also the source of wonder. Every discovery begins there. Every exploration, every scientific breakthrough, every journey across an ocean, every telescope pointed toward the stars, every question ever asked. The unknown terrified our ancestors. It also pulled them forward. Fear warned them to be careful. Curiosity urged them onward. Human history may be the story of those two forces negotiating with one another, neither winning, neither disappearing, both shaping everything. Tonight, somewhere in the world, someone will wake suddenly in the dark. For a brief moment, they will feel it. That ancient sensation. Not certainty, not knowledge. The opposite. A feeling that something exists beyond the edge of understanding. And for an instant, they will share an experience older than civilization, older than language, perhaps older than humanity itself. Because the first human fear was never simply about teeth in the darkness. It was about the darkness. Not the darkness outside. The darkness beyond knowledge. The space where certainty ends and possibility begins. The strange truth is that humanity did not conquer that fear. We built our entire civilization around it. Every tool, every story, every belief, every scientific discovery, each one an attempt to push back the boundary by a few more inches. Yet the boundary remains, waiting, silent, unmoved, at the edge of every map, at the edge of every lifetime, at the edge of every answer. And perhaps that is why the first human fear never vanished. Because the unknown was never something standing in our way. It was the thing that made us human in the first place.